Welcome back and good afternoon. I'm Alice Rushforth, Assistant Professor of Medicine at Tufts University School of Medicine. I am very pleased to introduce the second panel, Translating Gun Policy Research into Action at the State Level, a Success Story. Our second success story comes from the state of Michigan, where in 2022, they were able to pass comprehensive legislation that included a red flag law, expanded background checks, and a safe gun storage law. This panel will explore how Michigan was able to accomplish these wins. The keynote speaker for the panel is Alea Harvey-Quinn, the former executive director of Force Detroit, a community violence intervention organization dedicated to building a safer, freer Detroit. Under her leadership, Force Detroit became a national model for community violence intervention, with its programs leading to remarkable reductions in gun violence and serving as a catalyst to broad crime reductions across several Detroit neighborhoods. In fact, Force Detroit's evidence-based programs resulted in a reduction in gun violence by 72% in one Detroit neighborhood. Her innovative leadership helped secure more than $25 million in funding for community violence intervention programs in Detroit, and she has long been an advocate for the idea that the solutions to violence must come from within the communities most affected. We are very pleased that you are with us today. Welcome, Alea.
Thank you so much, Alice. I'd like to thank Tufts University for inviting me to share my journey. Okay. Wait a minute. Before you all leave, how do I control the PowerPoint? Or do I just say, turn it?
You'll say next slide.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'd like to thank Tufts University for inviting me to share my journey as the founder and former ED of Force Detroit. I'd like to thank our partners at the state of Michigan, both in the legislature and in MDHHS, who've resourced amazing CVI efforts throughout the state. I'd like to thank our partners at the city of Detroit, our now police chief, Bettison, public officials, city council, and staff for their partnership and innovative collaboration in developing shot stoppers. We've worked together to develop an instrument for documentation that proves the effectiveness of CVI. I'd also like to thank the staff of Force Detroit, our philanthropic partners, Faith in Action, Live Free National, our other national partners. Locally, I'd like to thank the Live Free Detroit Coalition and CVI leaders throughout the state who have partnered with us to lead CVI advocacy efforts. We couldn't have done it without our whole community. I wouldn't call myself a violence interventionist, but the first time I participated in an intervention, I was 5 years old. It was the mid-'80s. I found a man in the front closet of my home tied to a chair crying. It turns out my dad, a former Black Panther and self-proclaimed career criminal, asked the local dealers to stop selling drugs in the part of the neighborhood where my friends and I played. Stuff got wild. My uncle was kidnapped. My dad stood his ground. Of course, I had no idea what was going on, except that now this man was in my closet crying, and I was all up in his jerry curl with my barrettes, bows, and my mom's makeup. And when I finally asked him why he was crying, he said, "Your dad is gonna kill me." My smart mouth self said, "Daddy never hits. All you got to do is be good for a little while, and then you can be bad again." At this point, I was working on his eyeshadow. He never stopped crying. Eventually, after quite some time of torture, my parents found me in the closet. And when they did, I asked my dad to promise me that he wouldn't hurt the man. He promised. Unbeknownst to me, this was the beginning of a meaningful career path in CVI. At this point in my life, my family was my mom, my dad, my sisters, and my dad's criminalized revolutionary gang. I only knew my dad's friends as nurturing. Piggyback ride givers, ice cream truck stoppers, my godfather Motisa, who I later saw on America's Most Wanted, introduced me to the Nation of Islam as a child. I later practiced Islam as an adult. As I grew up, I would come to learn about a lot about how society viewed our people, Black and brown people, and my family. Criminals. I saw people that looked like me on cops, always as bad guys. It was the crack era, and everybody's father, brother, uncle was in prison. When people ask me why I do gun violence prevention work, I usually dodge the question because of the vulnerability of my answer. I sometimes feel like my father wounds were exposed in 3D for the world to see. On paper, I sought to find solutions to gun violence prevention, but in reality, I wanted to prove that my father, uncles, my community were not monsters, and that even if they had been in ugly situations, I believed firmly that we needed healing and culturally resonant opportunities, and I sought to gather the mostly men who were willing to drive that solution forward. So that's sort of where my work starts. Next slide. Force Detroit started out with 4 key goals: participatory research, narrative building, youth and millennial organizing, and coalition development. Our goal was really to understand safety, understand what was happening around violence, and figure out solutions that didn't criminalize people, and then involve community in leadership roles to drive those solutions forward. Next slide. So I wish our timeline was this clean. It's not. You'll see throughout this presentation that coalition building and community listening are key facets of how we do our work overall. In general, we launched with a critical landscape analysis of what was going on in Detroit. From that landscape analysis, we listened, we refined our issue like organizers usually do. From there, we built coalition, began exploring national models, and finally, we reached the phase that we're now in, which is advocacy and implementation. Next slide. So now I'm going to jump into a bit of our early landscape analysis. Next slide. So this is just research around the environment that we found in Detroit when we started. So little bit of a short history on Detroit. We were devastated by the housing crisis and by emergency takeover, which absorbed many of our public reserves. And by 2015, when Force Detroit was starting, people were beginning to proclaim that Detroit was a comeback city, but they were proclaiming that it was a comeback city without the residents participating in that comeback. At that time, 40% of Detroiters and 57% of children 18 and under lived below the federal poverty line. And while over 50% of adults didn't qualify for roughly 70% of the jobs. And one of the things that at the time, was a point of Detroit's resurgence was the fact that they had so many jobs. Other things that were sort of really, really important when we started was we were, as a nation, watching young Black men die at the hands of police on social media. And so we were seeing groups of identity groups, pro-Black groups, Black Lives Matter type of groups emerge all over the country, and Detroit was no exception. There were a number of groups that were pro-Black in nature, working to solve our safety needs. And so we saw things like gas station shutdowns. We saw an early program arise out of a local bookstore. This was called a Boots on the Ground. It was an early under-resourced CVI attempt. We saw one of the predominant community organizations release a street code for people at the center of violence to abide by and begin patrolling. And we also saw emergency response community canvassing. Next slide. So from there, we chose safety as an issue, and we were seeking community-led solutions that would revolve around these groups that were already doing phenomenal work and attracting many, many bodies to support them. Next slide. So this is where the research comes in. We had the data, we had the analysis, but we did a lot of listening and a lot of surveying in community. We conducted a survey, a community safety survey, where we surveyed about 1,200 Detroiters around their safety sentiments. And from this survey, we asked questions like, what are the root causes behind violence? Do you feel safe walking in your neighborhood? Would you take your children downtown to play? And what was the most striking outcome was that there were different answers depending on people's age range, which suggested that there was a vastly different experience for Detroiters depending on their age. So we released a number of reports. We released this safety survey. We released a cost of violence report. This is in partnership with Live Free National and Nick Jr. And we also released the Build Peace report, which is the summary of our overall strategy. I'll go over that a little bit later. Also, in terms of research, while folks were resting during COVID and recovering from a life of busyness, Forest Detroit was busier than ever. We were handing out hand sanitizer and masks to really, really vulnerable community members who otherwise weren't interested in COVID prevention. We were, because we were gathering a network, we were doing more re-granting and ever to fund the emergency work. A number of our coalition partners, and I'll talk about this later, but they worked in partnership with police and community activists to de-escalate violence during the George Floyd uprisings. We also took a number of trips to various places around the country to learn about their safety infrastructure, most importantly, Chicago and Oakland. Those were our two earliest trips. We'll dive into those a little bit later. And we hosted a ton of webinars with national experts on everything from different violence prevention models to diversion, case managers to learn the ins and outs of the job. Next slide. So briefly, after our initial safety report was released, we worked in partnership with Live Free and the Faith in Action National Network to host an organizing session in Detroit with our initial coalition partners. Our initial coalition partners worked with us to organize the foundation of our work. And so you'll see that the graphics and whatnot shift from forced to Live Free. And Live Free is a broader sort of values-based initiative where we were working to share credit, share resources, pull narratives together, and really push advocacy efforts that there was enough resourcing for everybody. That was the one thing, is to minimize competition. Another thing that we were sort of really, really focused on was getting the message out about alternative safety strategies and about the work that these groups were already leading without having meaningful budgets. So we worked with Faith in Action National, and we wanted to really, as a team, we wanted to visit cities that were successfully implementing alternative community-led safety models. We wanted Faith in Action to worked with us to host a gun violence reduction workshop in Detroit. You'll see that later. And we wanted to specifically learn from Devon Bogan, who was the founder. He's a Michigan native, actually. And he was the founder of Advanced Peace, which was an early CVI strategy that was able to reduce violence by 70%. Next slide. Next. Okay, so we did travel. In this picture, you'll see a number of leaders. You'll see a brother named Skrill. Skrill was the vice president of New Era Detroit. He later joined Force Detroit staff team. You'll see Negus Vu, which was the founder of the People's Action. And then you'll see them with Ben McBride, who is a notable CVI leader or ceasefire leader in Oakland. Oh, 5 minutes remaining. Let's speed up. Let's skip this. So we were able to, from those trips, we were able to detail the sort of variables that were necessary in order to implement a real methodical CVI strategy. Those elements included intensive case management, coordination with services such as parole and probation, violence intervention, credible messengers, the things that are widely known. We also were very, very struck by how central credible messengers were to the model. Most organizations that we visited were led by people who were at the center of violence. And there was a tone of deep respect for the streets that allowed people to partner towards creating increased safety. Next slide. This is the violence reduction workshop, and you'll see David Muhammad, Devon Bogan, and many other national leaders. Antonio Citadel, who was my liaison to Live Free. He's a brilliant researcher, and he supported me throughout the journey. Next slide. We finally came up with 4 goals, and I think this was in 2019, to reduce violence without increasing incarceration, to expand opportunities for leaders directly impacted by violence, criminalization, and mass incarceration, to partner with ceasefire because ceasefire was the strategy that Detroit had already signed on to. We wanted to facilitate a learning community with a number of various people of various backgrounds to come up with a set of strategic recommendations that we all agreed on. And 4, we wanted to work with a PR agency to heighten the public dialogue throughout the state around alternatives to safety. Next slide. So we were able to accomplish this. The next screen is a series of just photos documenting our effort. Next slide. You'll see, oh, okay. Let's move forward. Let's just move forward. The building peace report is the framework that eventually became Shot Stoppers. Next slide. We released this report in 2021. Next slide. Next slide. We talked about economic violence and how economics drives trauma, and trauma drives a host of different erratic responses, including violence. Next slide. Another thing that was really, really important is that this was an insight that came out of our one-to-ones. Many people were driving safety work because they had a core belief that was fundamentally in conflict with the other people from the space. They either believed that they were protecting victims, that God had given them a mission, they were trying to prove their own transformation, or they believed that we were our own solution to the problem. Either way, there was going to be conflict in this sector, but if we funded the entire sector, there was incredible sort of comprehensive strategies that emerged from the apparent conflict. Next slide. This is another demonstration of that same conflict. Next slide. This is the strategy that eventually became Shot Stoppers. We advocated for $775K per organization. The city ended up giving each group $700K. We advocated for a budget. We were asking for $15 million a year over 10 years to really build out this infrastructure. I believe we're getting there. The mayor of Detroit just committed $9 million of the city's public budget, even as we're advocating for statewide legislation that solidifies the strategy. Next slide. And these were our final outcomes. If you can see our heat map to the top sort of right of this, you can see where we began in terms of the violence and then what groups were able to accomplish in the green shaded parts of the city. We reduced violence to between 50 and 70% citywide. We informed strategy and policy for Michigan and Detroit's violence prevention strategies, driving advocacy for and winning the Office of Community Violence Intervention in MDHHS and Shot Stoppers City of Detroit CVI program. We were able to build a philanthropic table of 12 members to facilitate philanthropic partnership and redistribute over $1 million to build capacity for and with emerging CVI organization that had little to no infrastructure. But most importantly, I got to support the men and women who have experienced violent trauma, but were committed to putting their trauma aside to create culturally competent programming for people at risk of continuing cycles of violence. So I got to prove the sort of point that I started out with, that our people are not monsters, that we just need space and opportunity to create culturally competent trauma reducing programs. Thank you. Sorry to rush y'all.
Oh, thank you very much, Leah, for sharing your inspiring personal story and the really important work of Force Detroit. I'd now like to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Natasha Bagdasarian, Chief Medical Executive of the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. Dr. Bagdasarian is board certified in internal medicine and infectious diseases. She completed medical school at Wayne State University and her internal medicine residency and infectious diseases fellowship at the University of Michigan, where she also earned a Master's of Public Health degree. Dr. Bagdasarian is a member of Governor Gretchen Whitmer's cabinet, and she serves as chair of the governor's Gun Violence Prevention Task Force. Welcome, Dr. Bagdasarian.
Thank you so much for having me on. Really excited to share a little bit of the work we've been doing in Michigan. And I just want to say before I begin that none of this work would be possible without people who are doing this work every day, like the last speaker, Alea Harvey-Quinn, who has just been such a wonderful partner and is a member of our task force. So I want to give you a very quick rundown of how the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services has acted as a convener to bring people to the table to really make some of our policies more impactful. So this is a success story in the making. This is work that is happening right now, and we are not close to being done. First slide, please. I just wanted to start out by saying that Michigan is pretty close to the national average when it comes to firearm-related mortality. So we could be an indicator of what other states can achieve. Again, lots of good work being done, but that is still in progress. A lot of work yet to happen. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start out by just mentioning the firearm safety legislation that was passed in 2024 here in our state, because we are really trying to build on the success of this legislation. So 4 key pieces of legislation were signed and enacted in 2024. The first is a red flag or ERPO law. Second is universal background checks. Then we have a safe storage law and a domestic violence firearm possession ban. And I won't go into any more detail about these because I'm sure you are all familiar with these laws. But one of the goals of our gun violence prevention task force is to really make sure that these laws have the greatest chance of success. And we want to make them as successful and supported as possible in terms of implementation. Next slide, please. So our task force was initiated. We had our first meeting at the end of 2024. So we have only been around for just a few months. We were brought about by an executive order from the governor with the following objectives. We have to collect and compile data, identify root causes and contributing factors, assess effectiveness and gaps in current measures. We are to identify resources and also develop strategies for maximizing resources. But really, one of the key objectives here is to recommend new changes to Michigan's law and policy. So we want to recommend new policies and also make sure that existing policies have the greatest chance of success possible. And then we need a clear timeline for establishing and accomplishing these goals. Next slide, please. I'll tell you a little bit. Again, I won't go into any detail because I want to make sure we've got time for questions at the end and save time for the other speakers. But in terms of who is on the task force, it was really, really important to us at the state level to make sure that we had representatives from all potential stakeholder and partner groups at the table. I'm the chair of the task force, and I think it is telling that we have a doctor as the chair of this task force, because one of the narratives here is that gun violence is a public health issue. If something is killing our young people, if something is killing our community members, this is a health issue, and it should be framed as such. Then we've got representatives from, you see the list on the left is a list of governmental state departments. So making sure we've got the right people from state government here. And then the list on the right is a list of those who were named as we must have representation from the following folks: people with experience in studying gun violence, suicide prevention, school administrators, CVI services, domestic violence, tribal governments, faith-based organizations, victims of gun violence, prosecution, and law enforcement. So we wanted to make sure we had this really diverse group at the table. But more than this, and I'll talk a little bit about how we're doing this, we wanted to make sure that we had voices of folks who own firearms at the table. We wanted to make sure that we had folks who are hunters, folks who have guns in their home for other reasons. We want to make sure that these recommendations that come out of our task force are as broadly applicable, as implementable, as practical as we can absolutely make them. And we know that it cannot just be the voices of a few. We really need to make this the voices of many, and our recommendations need to appeal to as many people as possible. Next slide, please. I'm showing this slide looking at mortality rates and how gun violence is now the #1 cause of childhood mortality, not only in Michigan, but across our nation, because this is one of the really key talking points when we talk about gun violence as a public health issue and why we need to have representation from all those different groups. It's because this is a cause of death to our young people. And this has been a really strong talking point, especially when we say that we need to get healthcare involved. We need to make sure that we are talking about this in as strong a way as possible, is because of this data right here. And if we could go to the next slide. The other piece of data that I think has been really important as we're creating this narrative around gun violence and why it's everybody's problem is because I think a lot of folks tend to say, this is not my issue, this is someone else's issue. And gun violence has often been characterized as something that is only present in certain communities, that this is an urban issue, this is a big city issue. And when we look at rates of firearm mortality across the state of Michigan, the darker colors are areas where there are higher rates of firearm mortality. We are trying to show that this is everyone's problem. This is happening in every single part of our state, including very rural parts of the state up in the Upper Peninsula. Next slide, please. However, we have to be very data-driven in our approach to this. So if we're talking about taking a scientific and public health approach, that means taking a data-driven approach. And one of the ways we've structured our task force is to make sure that we are separating out the problems by their epidemiology, because we know that gun violence impacts different groups of people in different ways, and that there are going to be different solutions for each type of gun violence problem that is created. So the way we have sort of separated things is we've got self-harm, harm to others, and unintentional harm. And if we could go to the next slide, please. Again, I'm just running through some data that I'm sure you're all familiar with, so not going to go into any great depth here. But you know, we know that suicide and homicide are about each about half of the problem. Suicide a little bit more of an issue than homicide in terms of number of deaths, and unintentional injury plays a small part of this. And so we have to look at the data separately so that we can truly understand the root causes and then focus on those prevention strategies in a data-driven way. Next slide, please. One of the, again, talking points and the ways that we are trying to get everyone invested and involved in this problem is by showing that every part of the state is impacted by gun violence, but different parts of the state are impacted more so by firearm-related suicide versus homicide. And next slide. And when we separate out suicide, which we know is a little bit more than half of our firearm-related mortality, a pattern emerges that these are typically, those who are impacted are typically white and older. Again, many folks don't believe that this is their problem. We are trying to make it clear that this is everybody's problem. So suicides, we're typically seeing folks who are older and white or Native American. Next slide, please. And for firearm-related mortality, you can see that the victims are usually younger and Black. So again, different epidemiology and will require different approaches. Next slide, please. We talked about how unintentional injury makes up just a very small number of those actual firearm deaths. But what is so impactful about the unintentional injury data is that these are little kids. You can see that there are two sort of peaks here. One is for high schoolers, but the other peak is in toddlers and pre-K children. So even though the absolute number is smaller, we really want to tell people again that this is a preventable cause of childhood death and is currently impacting kids to a greater degree than things like drownings or motor vehicle accidents or even childhood cancers. So again, telling the story that this is everybody's issue, there are three different stories in terms of the epidemiology. Next slide, please. And so how we have tried to take this data and use it to structure and inform the task force is in a couple of ways. So number one, we have subcommittees that are each specifically tackling one of these key focus areas. So we have some subcommittees on implementation of existing policies. And I mentioned those 2024 laws that went into effect. So there is a subcommittee that is focusing on how do we make implementation of our red flag laws and our domestic violence possession bans as powerful as possible. How do we make sure all the factors are there to make these laws as successful as we can? We have a subcommittee that is talking about background checks and safe storage, making sure that those factors have all the supports needed. And then we've got subcommittees on recommendation for new policies, again, that look at the epidemiology of the different ongoing crises that are happening. So recommendation of new policies on suicide prevention, on community violence intervention, school safety, intimate partner violence prevention. And then we have a clinical coalition. And this is a group of healthcare workers, and we have healthcare leaders from every single health system across our state coming together to see what they can do as clinicians to really educate the public and educate their patients. One of the places where they are leaning in most is on safe storage, because again, even though the number of those unintentional injuries is not huge compared to suicide and homicide, we know that it is very impactful when we're talking about child death and completely preventable child death. So the clinical coalition is talking about things like, how do we make screening for safe storage a routine part of every pediatric visit? And we have some real leaders in the state where we're sharing best practices. And then we'll also be talking about how do clinicians really lean in on red flag laws. And my last slide will not make a whole lot of sense because I cannot yet share our first set of recommendations, which will be coming out a little bit later this month. But what we are developing, and I think what we are going to be very successful in, is each of those subcommittees has developed some really robust recommendations. And what we've done is we've charted them according to the financial resources needed and feasibility factors, things like political will and how difficult implementation could be. And so you can see here, this is just a scatter plot showing where our recommendations lie without telling you what the recommendations are. But you can see here that most of them are in this green left lower quadrant, which are recommendations that don't have a lot of financial requirements and don't have a lot of challenging political or other feasibility obstacles for us to overcome. And we will be focusing on those low-hanging fruit first, and then making a plan and a timeline for implementation. So the first 6 months, we're coming up with an outline of recommendations, and the next 6 months, we're going to spend really creating an outline and a timeline for implementation and what implementation could really look like, as well as identifying funders and putting work groups together to really make sure that all of our recommendations are implemented. Now, the last thing I want to say, I only have a couple of minutes left. The last thing I want to say is that all of this work has to be data-driven and has to be, we have to follow the science. And one of the things that we are facing nationally right now is a defunding of public health at all levels, federally, state level, which is trickling down to local levels as well. There have been entire departments, divisions wiped out at the CDC. And that is going to impact our access to data and how we are able to use data to really take the most beneficial course of action. So I just want to put a plug in there for the importance of public health, the importance of collecting this data, the importance of continuing on the work that has already been done for decades in preventing firearm violence. Thank you so much for my time.
Great, thank you, Dr. Bagdasarian, for sharing your work in progress in Michigan. We look forward to hearing what the recommendations are going to be and see how you implement them. And I also want to thank you for highlighting the importance of taking a data-driven approach. I think this is well received in this audience, and really we understand the need for that. So I'd like to introduce our second panelist, the former Michigan State Representative, Dr. Felicia Brabeck. Dr. Brabeck served in the the Michigan House of Representatives from 2020 to 2024, and is currently running in the 2026 Michigan State Senate election. Representative Brabeck played a crucial role in the enactment of Michigan's gun violence prevention legislation in 2022. She earned her PhD from the Illinois School of Professional Psychology and is a practicing clinical psychologist. Welcome, Dr. Brabeck.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to be here with all of you. I would like to begin much like Ms. Harvey Quinn did and saying thank you to Tufts for bringing us all together and allowing us to share this space to talk about this critical issue. You got to hear a little bit about my background. I will also add that, I'm the mom of two kiddos who go to school and have the experience of doing drills, active shooter drills. This was not the case when I was a student, a young student, much like many of you, I'm assuming. And I also got to chair in 2003 and 2004, that cycle. I was the chair of our state's gun violence prevention caucus for both the House and the Senate. And so I bring all of those things together to bear on this work that, as both Ms. Harvey Quinn and Dr. Bagdasarian have talked about, we don't do it in a vacuum, right? We are all doing this together. So I want to talk about a little bit of the context that we got to work in. So in 2022, I'm also a Democrat. Democrats won, and for the first time in 40 years, had what we call the trifecta. So that means that we held the governor's office, the state house, and the state senate. And the legislative work prior to that time was consistently being done in this area. And so folks were busy doing, I know there was a lot of work on banning assault weapons, storage, things like that. However, we weren't in leadership positions and all the necessary places to be able to get that legislation passed. And just as a marker that this work has been going on for so long, in June of 2016, two representatives, Robert Wittenberg and John Holdley, they started the Gun Violence Prevention Caucus. Again, that was June of 2016. And they said that they were starting this with the express purpose of addressing the number of gun-related deaths in Michigan. Now, bringing us back, so we had that kind of as a foundation. Then we had the elections of 22. We're going into 23. We know that this is of value and something that we as Democrats really wanted to move forward while we had the trifecta and the ability to do that. And Dr. Bagdasarian talked about, and she showed us that map, that showed that this is an issue that everyone is affected by and grapples with. And Ms. Harvey Quinn talked about the impacts of our neighborhood gun violence. And so again, with this data that we had, we knew that these were issues we wanted to tackle. And then there were two incidents that happened that got national coverage in our state, in addition to the violence that we were already experiencing. So the first was that on November 30th of 2021, a high school student in Oxford, Michigan, killed 4 of his classmates and injured 7 others with a firearm that was purchased for him by his parents as a holiday present. The second incident occurred on February 13th of 2023, and a 43-year-old man shot and killed 3 students and injured 5 more on the campus of Michigan State University. And those very public incidents, in addition to what was the experience of so many Michiganders, led to us being able to really have a concerted push to get these bills across the finish line. We started, and you've heard about for the legislation. I'm going to talk about a little bit more in addition to the original ones, the foundational ones. So the foundational ones that legislation that we really focused on were the background checks on all firearms, safe storage when minors are present, and the emergency risk protection orders, or ERPO. And so we were able to work on those, pass them, and it wasn't like it's always smooth sailing. There's always negotiation. You're working with different partners, and I'll talk some about like all the partners that we get to work with as well. But getting those passed, I could remember at times worrying that, you know, all the wheels were going to kind of fall off the bus because it is, there's lots of moving parts and folks at the table, and we want to make sure that we have the legislation is as strong as we can make it to be able to help protect Michiganders. So I was very excited to get those three foundational packages of bills passed. We also had additional pieces that we were able to get passed. The first was closing the partner loophole. And so that bill would prohibit a person, and Dr. Bagdasarian had this on her list as well, but that would prohibit a person who's convicted of specific misdemeanors, particularly involving domestic violence, from possessing, using, or transferring their firearm for 8 years after parole or probation for the violation. And so that was another area that we really wanted to make sure that we had some protection for Michiganders around. So we were able to work and get that through both chambers, work with the governor's team to get that done as well. The next piece of legislation that I wanted to talk about came about, there was a New York Times, and some of you may be familiar with this. There was a New York Times piece that came out in December of 2023 regarding ghost guns and buyback programs and the disposal of those weapons. And this piece focused on Michigan State Police's use of a third-party vendor named Gunbusters. And what we found out from this piece, news piece, was that Gunbusters did not destroy the entire weapon. There were two pretty major parts that were left out, and then those parts were being repackaged and sold as ghost gun kits. And so I can tell you that this was pretty shocking. And I actually remember, again, I was chair of the Gun Violence Prevention Caucus. I was at the airport in Detroit, getting on a flight to go to DC, and my phone, it just started dinging. And lots of people were reaching out to me because this had come out. This is something that we as legislators did not know. I guess I can use I statements. I did not know and was shocked by. And so as soon as I landed in DC, I immediately called our Attorney General and our legislative liaison for the Michigan State Police and talked with them about what was happening, why it was happening, why we didn't know, and how to change it. And so working with MSP was fantastic. We were able to, I asked them immediately to stop using Gunbusters. Even though we didn't have legislation on the table, that request was made of them from our caucus for them to stop using Gunbusters immediately and hold the weapons that they confiscate from Gunbusters, or excuse me, from gun buyback programs, or weapons that were confiscated during the commission of a crime. And so we, again, they were fantastic to work with. They held right away. MSP started keeping all those weapons until we were able to figure out a solution. We figured out a solution. They made it, the MSP made that solution policy. The new vendor completely destroys the weapons that MSP is given, again, either through buyback programs or the weapons that are used in the confiscation of a crime. And so that legislation did not pass. So we did not make it law until 2024, but that became the practice at the beginning of 2024. And so we're very grateful that happened. There's additional legislation that we have passed, again, in working with our partners and data. And so there are two pieces of legislation, and then I want to touch on what Ms. Harvey Quinn was really focusing on, was community violence intervention. So one package was prohibiting guns in polling places and where ballots are counted. And so that has now been passed and signed by the governor here in Michigan. And then the second piece, and we talked about this, Dr. Bagdasarian alluded to this, I talked about at the beginning of my comments, is around safe storage. And so now our school systems disseminate information to parents and legal guardians about safe storage. And so once we've passed all this legislation, we had to figure out how to operationalize it so that folks knew what they needed to do, what they could do, what they couldn't do. And so that law around safe storage was an attempt to be able to educate our parents about how they can safely store guns when minors are present in the home. Finally, we have community violence intervention. Now, while there's not legislation around it, we did have appropriations around that. So millions of dollars were given throughout the state in hopes of shoring up and offering support to our local partners like Force Detroit, who are doing this work, right? That's the thing that we're trying to do all the time, is partner with folks. I know in the county that I get to represent, it was through our sheriff's office and the work that they have been doing, and partnering again with local nonprofits around CVI. And additionally, there's work around an office at the state. And so lots of work in lots of different places, legislation and appropriations. But again, I just feel like I cannot understate this. Like, we do not do this in a vacuum. And so we have several partners who we work with. I was on the phone with constantly. And at the national level, our partners are Everytown, and that's again, policy and advocacy, Giffords, policy and advocacy, Brady is policy advocacy and legal. And so, I could call and ask them legal questions. How has this worked in other states? And so all of our contacts in all of those different organizations, I had regular conversations with as our team in Michigan was working to pass legislation with our partners. On the state level, we have an organization called End Gun Violence Michigan, who are local advocates, throughout the state who are working on this. And it's a very diverse group. Folks come from all sorts of different organizations. And that group is really helpful because that group has tentacles out into our communities. And so they could bring back information that was really helpful for us as we were considering different legislation and how to shape the legislation. The other group that on a state level that really worked with and got to focus on, or we did, was through the University of Michigan. And through the University of Michigan, they have what's called the Institute for Firearm Injury Prevention. And that is a research arm which collects the data locally to use in the creation of further legislation. What they also did, which was very helpful, was they became a partner in developing materials to disseminate to residents on all of the new laws. Again, we have these new laws, we want to enact them, but people need to know what they mean and how and what it looks like and how we can do that. And so that's one of the things that that was really important, that the Institute for Firearm Injury Prevention, we were able to work with them on. In terms of departments, at the state, we had several that we worked with. I've mentioned MSP, the Senate, the Governor's Office, the Attorney General, the Department of Education, HHS is Dr. Bagdasarian and her task force are here, and the Secretary of State, who you obviously are going to be hearing from as well. And working all together, that is something that has been that's been how we have been able to get this work done, is doing that all together. And I will say the most important partner that we've had are our residents, and being able to understand what our residents need, what they're seeing, how we can actually address it. There's nothing more frustrating than having legislation that doesn't match what the need is. And so, bringing all of those different folks to the table to be able to create intentional, responsive legislation is our goal. And so we're constantly working to be able to do that. There's future legislation that we're always going to be working on. We want it to be data-based, of course, like Dr. Bagdasarian was saying. We want to know what folks are seeing on the ground. I'm so sorry, everyone. I'm so sorry, everyone. In terms of future legislation that is being done, we're working together with everyone, again, being data-driven. We have ghost guns. We still have legislation that needs to be done around that. We have in our state, we still have stand your ground laws. We are the only bluer state that still has these laws on the books. So we need to do something about that. We need to look at industry accountability and try and figure out how we want to do that. We've done this with other industries. And so there's opportunity to do it here with this industry. And then the final thing that we could take a look at is a gun dealer code of conduct. And that is the code of conduct that we, for example, is to prevent access of firearms to people who should not have them, and we want to encourage the firearms dealers to adapt reasonable, responsible business practices and to take measures that prevent folks from having guns and getting them in their hands that they shouldn't have them. So there's lots of legislation, and there's more than that list that I just outlined. And so I know that the work will continue. We are currently in a different context now, and in Michigan, we were in the most ideal context over the past 2 years. Now it's not as ideal. My hope is that we will continue to lay groundwork to pass additional laws as we have as the environment is ripe for us to be able to pass those laws. Like I said, again, right now that's not the case, but we need to keep doing this work so that we can do that. And as I think about kind of leading up, or kind of wrapping up and continuing the work that we've been able to do, then this work doesn't happen in a vacuum. I know I said that, but I just feel like I can't overstate it. There's just so much to be done, and none of us can do it alone. So it takes all of our different expertise and all working together, rolling together, to be able to do that work. And the research that is being done by all the folks who are doing it is so important. And I'm grateful to all of them, whether that's the research and work that the Firearms Institute is doing at University of Michigan, or the work that Dr. Bagdasarian's group is doing, or the work that Ms. Harvey Quinn's group is doing, bringing all that together to help us understand and develop the necessary policies that we need to implement. And I just want to say that I'm grateful to all of us for working on these, for all of you for being here, for your continued interest in this very important work. And for me, in the end, my hope is that we are implementing policies that address this uniquely American issue so that less residents are unnecessarily impacted by such preventable incidents. Thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate it. My apology for the interruption. Our daughter is actually getting an MRI. And so, as a mom, again, just trying to juggle lots of different things. So I appreciate you all having us and uplifting what we've been able to do in Michigan. And I hope that we can all continue in partnership together.
Well, thank you so much for Dr. Braybrick for those wonderful insights, and also your incredible energy and passion for this work, and your work as a mom multitasking. That's amazing. So I think we're going to take a few questions first. We're waiting for our third panelist to come on. So I will just start with those. One of the questions we have is oh, should we go? Maybe we've got our third panelist. Okay, terrific. So I'll shift gears here and introduce our third and final panelist is Michigan Deputy Secretary of State Agogo Adavieh. He has served as deputy to Michigan's Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson since 2023. Agogo and the Secretary of State Benson work closely with state lawmakers to enact gun violence prevention legislation, including a ban on firearms in polling places. Prior to becoming Deputy Secretary of State, Agogo was the Michigan State Director for All Voting is Local, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to safeguarding voter rights. He is an attorney and received his law degree at the University of Michigan. Welcome, Deputy Secretary of State Adavieh, and somebody who is cuts things. You must be very efficient in the way you're working. So thank you for joining us.
I'm trying to be. I apologize for getting on a little late. I
No
was trying to
worries.
join for my work laptop and the link was just not working and then the
Oh,
internet
dear.
was down. So I'm joining on my personal laptop, which I think is working well. And I'm really honored to be with you all today. And of course, to join you and Representative Braybeck, soon to be State Senator Braybeck, we hope, to talk a little bit about the issue of gun violence and the progress we're making in Michigan to leverage the research and solid bipartisan legislation that we have had in the state to prevent it. The work of preventing gun violence is a truly unique challenge because it has a devastating impact in communities large and small across the nation. And it's a problem we know how to solve. And on top of it, people across the country and people of Michigan want it. If asked, most people will say that they're in favor of legislation that prevents firearm violence. So many people are asking, why is this problem not getting solved? And we know that the solution is to get the decisions out of the hands of the special interest groups who oppose the legislation and to get away from legislators who are trying to curry favor to them and instead put the decision on the hands of voters. And that's what we've done here in Michigan. We first went through something called a Voters Not Politicians ballot initiative, which was a redistricting project to get rid of gerrymandering and make our legislative bodies more representative of the desires of the people. Second, we pushed through two different constitutional amendments in 2018 and 2022, which increased ballot access and really gave Michigan residents and voters the ability to choose convenient options for them to vote and ultimately make their voices heard. As a result, we had a legislature in 2023 and 2024 to help us pass some really successful gun safety laws, including a secure storage law, a ban on ghost guns, a ban on rapid fire devices, and most importantly, I think for our department, the Secretary of State's office, a ban on open carry at polling places and at drop boxes. And this is something that we have heard repeatedly. I just was on the phone last week with a potential poll worker who was terrified until I told her that we passed this legislation to prevent open carry at a polling place. So it really has a dramatic effect in making people more comfortable, but also drawing down and reducing the tension that we often see when guns are introduced into otherwise safe environments. This happened because citizens were allowed to draw their representative jurisdictions and have this greater ballot access that I mentioned before. But what we've seen overall in Michigan is that we have a more educated and more engaged electorate taking advantage of these new options. Last year, we had 5.7 million ballots cast in the November general election. That's 79% of all active Michigan registered voters. 3.4 million voted by mail or at an early vote site, and 2.3 cast a ballot on election day. And over 800,000 of these people were first-time voters. So we are really seeing a lot of different progress that we are all very proud of. And Secretary Benson and I are very encouraged by this surge in voter participation, and we're proud that Michigan is leading the way. We now rank second in the nation for election administration, rising from 31st when the Secretary first took office. Now, we still have some challenges, of course, to our democracy and to making sure that people have their voices heard. We have a lot of hardworking politicians on the other side who are trying to introduce things called the SAVE Act and House Joint Resolution B in the legislature here in Michigan, who are trying to introduce measures that would only counter and weaken the voices of the people. So we are in a fight, and we're looking for allies like all of you who are going to help us push back against these efforts to make it harder to vote. We're asking every single citizen to stand up and make their voices heard, but we're also asking for people to stay informed, to be energized, and be inspired, and encourage others to do the same. And with that, I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to take part in this Q&A, and thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Davier, and thanks to all of the panelists and sharing these wonderful successes in Michigan. We have about 15 minutes or so for questions, and I can start with the first one. We have a number in the question and answer feature. The first is, research has shown that if surrounding states don't have strong gun laws, it undermines the effectiveness of a state's gun laws. Has there been any effort in Michigan officials or groups to reach out to colleagues in Ohio or Indiana to try to engage them in gun violence prevention efforts?
I can take that. We actually, we have in our clinical coalition, we found that Ohio has a really robust page for their clinicians full of lots and lots of resources. So this is not necessarily a governmental run page, but this is the American Academy of Pediatrics Ohio chapter is doing some really amazing things. And so we are definitely forging some interstate relationships in places like Ohio, sort of seeing what they're doing successfully and how we can leverage upon those things. I do think that as some of our recommendations come out and maybe as we garner some more traction, there will be further outreach.
Terrific. Second question, is there any awareness of how insisting that guns which are bought under the buyback laws policies are be destroyed instead of resold to responsible owners or even as parts, potentially as funding a resource for violence prevention? It makes it appear that such efforts are simply anti-gun, not violence prevention or safety focused. Hi, can we? I'm going to ask everybody on the panel to put their cameras on, so that will help. Leah, if you're there. So any sense of how we might refocus that buyback program so that it might actually be focused more on the anti-violence rather than sort of a anti-gun ownership?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I would just say I think the key is to really engaging with legislators in the state house and state senate, not only in Michigan but all across the Midwest. It's really important that people not see these gun buyback programs as anti-gun measures, because that does make them less effective, as we've seen in the past. But the legislatures ultimately have a lot of power in terms of how these things are set up, how they're designed in legislation, and ultimately how they're implemented. So a lot of input needs to come from the legislators, and a lot of outreach needs to go to them.
I just want to add, I think this is why it's so important to have gun owners at the table, because I think if we are talking about things in a way that is unpalatable to gun owners, if we're coming across as being anti-gun, I think it really weakens our message. And so having a broad coalition with as many diverse viewpoints as possible is really important here.
Terrific.
There,
So,
just
oh, yes. Oh,
there are some
yeah.
there are some attempts to design bullet tracing programs. And so I think, you know, as opposed to focusing on guns, making sure that we understand where the ammunition is
Mhm.
being used and how becomes another important avenue.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. So it was mentioned that Michigan still has the stand your ground laws, and wondering if there are available data to support the danger of these laws. Presumably that will be key to revising these laws. This gets back to the importance of data.
So I can't speak to the specifics of that, but I will say one of the things that really concerns me is how we have seen a complete gutting of the folks at the CDC who are studying injury prevention. So that whole division is gone, which means that not only have we seen impacts with access to data dashboards, but also the folks who we are used to picking up the phone and calling are no longer there. We've been struggling with this on and off for the last few weeks, and I think the last few days have made things even more clear where we're going. And I can't speak to that specific data, but what I will say that right now, having access to data is more important than ever. And especially if we're talking about making policy decisions that really have the impacts we desire.
I can just add that I'm so grateful for both our Firearm Institute and Dr. Bagdasarian and the work that she is doing, because data is hard. It has been hard historically to get, and we need partners like Dr. Bagdasarian and our Firearm Institute to be able to rely on that. I can tell you that particularly with the stand your ground laws, that's something that I've talked a lot with our partners at Everytown. You know, and they also do that kind of coalescing of data. It's another part that I rely on, particularly with regard to that issue.
Great, thank you. We do have a question about whether Michigan works with federal firearm licensees for temporary storage locations through legislation or state agencies.
I can start. I don't know if others want to talk about this, but yeah, that is something that we have talked about being an issue. It's one of the things that I did for my own edification is I'm not a gun owner, but I wanted to learn about the process of becoming a gun owner. So I talked with and sat down with a federally qualified individual, and he walked me through all of the steps and then some of the issues. And this is one of the issues. And so that's another thing. There are so many things on the radar that we need to look at, and this is another one. So yeah.
Yeah, still lots of work to do for sure. Sure. Well, and with that, we have a student who's interested in gun violence who's asked a question. In Indiana, it seems our Department of Health is unsure how they can be engaged in policy advocacy. Can you speak to that?
Sure. I'm not sure if that was specifically for me, but I can start and other people can chime in. What I found with any policy, when you're trying to advocate, is finding a couple of legislators who you feel like can be champions, and starting there. And then building out your team from there. And so if you know that there are legislators who are passionate about this and want to take on this charge, start meeting with them, providing them with information, that connecting them to the people that they need to be connected to in your state, primarily other residents, and then different national stakeholders and experts. That is how I found with any policy, that's kind of a good way to go about it.
Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly. I would also add it's important to inform the advocacy groups that have named gun violence as an issue so that they can work in partnership with the department and the legislature. Because as a governmental institution, their hands are a bit tied, but they can educate everybody.
I agree with both of my co-panelists there. And I just want to say that, you know, a lot of these organizations, like Everytown, they've been doing this work for decades. And so they have these relationships and they know who to call and how to do it. And it's really good to partner with them. And then you get, you know, invited to go and testify at the appropriate time. For us in Michigan, at the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, I think it's been important to frame this as a health issue because it is something that is killing our residents. And so that makes it a health issue. And it doesn't quite take the political bite out of it. But maybe it blunts it a little bit if we start reframing this as a health issue, just like motor vehicle accidents, just like drowning deaths. It should be no different.
Absolutely, absolutely. Can the panelists speak to how gun violence prevention policies we pass can ensure that we don't wholesale enact penalties that will disproportionately impact Black and Brown communities that are already over-policed? Harsh penalties in the state and local policies are leading to a layering effect of criminal charges for over-policed communities.
Thank you for that question. I can just quickly say that because of the worry of that happening, we have put in our particularly, I believe it was our ERPO language, that our institute, Firearm at U of M, is still like making, this is one of the things that they have to specifically look at, so that if that is indeed happening, then we have the data to support a solution. And so that is something that we thought about and put it right in the legislation immediately. It needs to be something that we are constantly, I feel like, on alert for, frankly.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Yeah, so I had to skip through these slides because I didn't have as much time as I thought. But if you overlap the map with a map where there's not high quality schools or high quality grocery stores or high quality any basic needs, you will see that that is the same map that is a heat map around excessive gun violence. And so, you know, there's never enough time in the day, but like at its core, gun violence is a response to a bunch of systems failing us. And so it feels like it's really, really important that we connect the data that we're collecting at these CVI sites to other basic needs institutions, and that we're working hand in hand with institutions like MDHHS to make sure that we're connecting the right people to the right resources and advocating for the very core of the work, the basic needs support that our citizens really need. Like we have to spend some of our time not just advocating for gun violence, advocating for high quality education, advocating for high quality health outcomes, high quality grocery stores, things like that.
Yeah, I would just add, I think one of the things that we see from the election side and just in terms of engagement of Black and Brown communities is there has to be a sense that government is responsive to their needs. And when we are implementing laws that seem to punish them for simply existing, there's a real backlash and a real inability of anyone to really feel comfortable interacting with any level of government. And that ultimately hurts us all because the less people who are involved in the government, the less people who feel comfortable being able to just be involved in their child's school or to report a crime or to do whatever it takes just to be an integrated member of society, it just really reduces the social bonds that are really critical, especially at this time when we're experiencing so much upheaval in our government.
Thank you. Question, how do we contend with universities who do this research being told to comply with federal mandates related to DEI when we know gun violence disproportionately impacts marginalized communities?
You know, this might not be my area of expertise, but I think this is all semantics, right? And I think, whereas when I was writing a grant in a different area, I might talk about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now I would be talking about the importance of life skills, and I would be uplifting certain other conservative dingers that work. I think we all have to understand what the goal is and march out with our marching orders in a way that doesn't red flag our institutions. And I just do think we have to play these games as public sector leaders around languaging during different administrations.
Yeah, agreed. It's an interesting time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm never going to advocate for people to break the law, but there is a quote that I think has been floating around: do not comply in advance, do not obey in advance. Uh, Laws are meant to be challenged in court and through civil disobedience and at the election box. That is the whole entire point of our democracy. And if we're not doing that and we're just simply saying to the powers that be, oh, you get to do what you want, you just tell us, we're no longer a functional democracy. So I think people, when they're thinking about DEI and how to apply that to gun violence and other parts of our government and our research, really have to be careful about not allowing a point of view that may not persist in 4 years. There's going to be another presidential election in 4 years, God willing, that we have an opportunity to reset and push forward different visions. So if we're complying in advance, we're obeying in advance, we're not really giving our democratic processes a chance to work the way that they're supposed to.
I would add that the work is the work to me, and if Black and Brown communities are disproportionately affected, that does not change regardless of how we're talking about it. Those are facts. And so if we're starting from a place where that we know is true, and being responsive to those facts and the data that we have, then that's where the focus is, and that's what we write about. And so to me, it's that does not change because there's been kind of an edict that's come down.
Agree. Whether we say vulnerable communities or those who have been most impacted, the work has to happen. And we are in this for the long haul, right? None of this is going to be fixed overnight. So we've got to think about building the infrastructure now so that the work can continue in 10 years and 20 years.
Yeah. I'm wondering, we have a question here about, again, data, but wondering about what kind of data you're using to follow the impact of your excellent legislation in the coming years. How are you understanding what the impact is?
I can say a couple of words about this. I've spoken about the recommendations that are coming out, and I can't talk about anything in detail, but one of our recommendations is for more robust data collection, because we know that the systems, we've got these great laws. We've got to make sure that they've got everything they absolutely need in order to be successful. But then we've also got to make sure that the systems are in place to collect the data. And right now, those systems are separated and disjointed, and there is data that's manually entered. And so some of our recommendations will be on streamlining data collection.
I
And
think
I can say as a, oh, I'm so sorry.
I think additionally, it'll be important to document the impact of our work on the budget positively, right? So when violence occurs, there are a number of public supports that show up and leak violently public dollars out of our budget. And so I know there are some partnerships afoot that would allow us to do that. And I think there are multiple sectors of the work that we could document that for, not just community violence intervention.
I agree with my fellow panelists. The other thing that I am not a researcher, I'm a clinician. And so I'm grateful for our researchers, all of you who are out there. Uh, One of the things that I'm always struck by, and Leah, you were just talking about this, is how do we document the absence of something, right? Like we've done something and now it's not having, and that is always something that, yeah, go ahead.
I got two
Oh,
ways.
you got balloons.
I didn't know I was gonna have. So there are two ways. First, the shot stopper innovation that Chief Bedison designed in his role as deputy mayor when he designed the shot stopper initiative was to create pockets of the city where there were CVI strategies and then actually control groups where there were non-CVI strategies. And then there was a documented decrease that was much, much sharper in CVI neighborhoods than even in highly policed neighborhoods. That meant that, and now our CVI neighborhoods are still being serviced by the police, right? The police are still doing their part, but the layering on of support made a marketed difference. The other thing, if you're a CVI institution, you can document the inputs. So your basic needs support services, the therapeutic supports, the this and that, and you can compare it to policing data before and after. I think both approaches, one is a macro level, one is a micro level. I think both approaches are incredibly important.
So on the flip side of the successes, some Republican lawmakers in Michigan have filed legislation to repeal the red flag law and some aspects of the 2022 legislation. How are you working to ensure, how can we all work to ensure that we don't move backwards?
Well, the good news is that the governor is still governor for the next 2 years. And so she would veto any legislation. And we also have a state senate that is anti pushing back any of these laws. However, there is an election in 2026. And the first line of defense is to elect people who understand that common sense gun control measures need to stay on the books in Michigan. And we probably need to look at other reforms too. Apart from that, I think it's really important that people organize and reach out to their legislators and reach out to the elected officials at all levels. Because the thing that you have to remember is that somebody who's at the city council level, somebody who's on the school board, they're all potential people on the farm team to eventually get in the legislature. And the longer that they hold those views and start believing those things, the more likely that they're going to be able to withstand the pressure that you do feel when you're a legislator or you're a statewide official. So it's really important to have ordinary folks reaching out to their elected officials to let them know that this is an important thing that they should stand on.
Yeah, as an organizer, I think we need to identify the legislators that are impacted by suicide and pop them because they might not realize how incredibly effective red flag laws are for suicide prevention. But suicide prevention is not an urban strategy such as the ones that they're trying to dismantle. It is a universal concern that impacts us all. And so somebody needs to go hunt down these legislators that have had family members or somebody unfortunately commit suicide, deeply educate them and flip them as an activist.
Okay, so Could you talk a little bit more about implementation of the red flag law in Michigan, and what the state's experience has been so far? And do you have any advice for other states that might be considering such laws?
Sure. So, implementation piece, we have to work obviously with our Attorney General and her office to be able to make sure everyone's on the same page and the interpretation of the law is the same as the intent of the law. And that's also why we have groups like End Gun Violence Michigan and our Firearms Institute who are helping to disseminate information on what this means. And I can tell you that I know of 2 instances for sure that I know about, that people have told me about, that they believe that being able to enact an ERPO has saved someone's life since the passage of those bills. And that's, like, again, I have fully admitted I am not a researcher, but I do love qualitative data. Again, as a clinician, I love, like, hearing the stories and that human, like, impact in that way. That's what resonates with me. And so hearing those 2 stories from the folks who were part of that was really meaningful. There's still a lot of work to be done. I'm not a lawyer, and so I know that there are going to be legal questions and things like that. But I am grateful for our Attorney General and her work and guidance in making sure that that what we're trying to accomplish is what the law says, and being able to get that information out to folks so that the law is used properly to be able to help.
Just want to add, we have all kinds of recommendations coming out on how to best implement our ERPO laws. But I'll say one of the things that's been flagged in my peer group, so in clinicians, is that most clinicians have no idea how to be involved in the process, how to help their patients, how to advocate. So if you're an ER doctor or primary care physician and you have a patient who is coming to you with either fears and concerns or experiences, and you think that they would benefit from an ERPO, most clinicians have no idea how to guide their patients. And so one of the things our clinical coalition is going to be working on and will be in our recommendations is to really make sure that mental health professionals and all clinical professionals know how to advocate and help their patients.
I think we have time for one last question, and this is for Dr. Bagdasarian. So question is, no gun rights groups show up on the Michigan task force. Were any of those groups approached to be on the task force when initially formed? If not, how are the interests and knowledge of the gun owners being considered?
So the task force members, that's just sort of the governor appointed task force members. That's a small group compared to who's actually involved. I mentioned those 7 subcommittees, and those subcommittees are full of all kinds of additional people. Anyone that we think will be helpful is invited to those subcommittees. So we've got a lot of folks who represent gun owner groups, as well as folks who are from organizations that advocate for gun safety. So our subcommittees are chock full of people with all kinds of different experiences. And in addition to having our subcommittee meetings, we are in parallel having meetings with potential funders and other advocacy groups to make sure that the things we're going to be recommending are sort of aligned and really practical, and that people can get behind them from the beginning stages, so that then they want to fund them and they want to make these all possible. So the list that you're seeing is just a small chunk of the people who are actually involved. And also, this is just unrelated to that question. I want to just say that I am so appreciative for my co-panelists. They've all just said such wise and, really answered these questions so thoughtfully, and, really a lot of food for thought for me as well. So just what a great panel. That's all I want to say.
I could not have said it better. I agree entirely. And you've taken a lot of questions, and your work's been really inspirational. And I think it's wonderful to see Michigan as a leader in this space. So thank you all for sharing your time and your thoughts and your knowledge with us. And with that, we will take a 10-minute break and we will be returning at 2 p.m. But thank you again very, very much. Welcome back, everyone. We will get started with our third panel, Bridging the Divide Between Gun Owners and Non-Gun Owners, a game changer for gun violence prevention policy promotion. This panel will describe a novel research project being conducted at Tufts. But first, we are honored to have with us two healthcare CEOs who are playing a leading role in bringing together healthcare CEOs across the nation to fight gun violence. On February 28th, 2023, the CEOs of 50 of the largest health systems and hospitals in the United States met to pledge their support for efforts to curb the epidemic of firearm violence. At that time, they formed the National Healthcare CEO Council on Gun Violence Prevention and Safety. We are pleased to welcome two of the CEOs who have been leading this effort. First, we have Michael Dowling, CEO of Norwell Health. Michael Dowling is one of healthcare's most influential voices. He is an award-winning healthcare leader, author, and national keynote speaker who takes a stand on societal issues such as gun violence, corporate social responsibility, and immigration, issues many health system CEOs shy away from. As president and CEO of Norwell Health, he leads the largest healthcare provider and private employer in New York State. Second, we have Michael Dandorf, president and CEO of Tufts Medicine, an accomplished healthcare executive known for spearheading transformational change. In this role, he unites more than 13,000 Tufts Medicine employees and clinicians in the common goal of integrating academic medicine and high-quality care across healthcare members, physicians groups, and communities they serve. Previously, Mr. Dandorf served as president of Rush University System for Health and Rush University Medical Center, a leading health system in the metropolitan Chicago area, including several medical centers, more than 30 regional outpatient locations, and a fully integrated health science university. Welcome, Mr. Dowling and Mr. Dandorf. We are really pleased that you are here with us today.
Thanks, Alice. I think I'm going to start. First, let me applaud all the work that 97% has been doing, and also just state how proud I am of the extraordinary work that Tufts Clinical and Translational Science Institute has been doing to perform not only great research, but to really convene leaders, experts, and advocates to identify ways to translate gun violence research into common ground, bipartisan, and hopefully gun owners supported actions to really address what is a true public health crisis across the United States. Personally, while I now lead an academic health system in Massachusetts, where we're fortunate enough to have some of the strictest gun laws in the United States and have some of the lowest gun death rates in the country, certainly over the course of my 30-year career or so, I've served in leadership roles in several health systems, including in the west side of Philadelphia and the west side of Chicago at Rush, as Alice mentioned. And I feel an obligation that we have as healthcare leaders to lean in and speak out on national public health crises, and this is one of them that we must address. And particularly when we know that preventative gun violence is a leading cause, if not the leading cause, of death of our children. And a father and soon to be a grandfather. These are important personal issues for all of us, I know. So when we think about community violence and gun violence, it isn't only a healthcare priority, right? It's a social priority and even an economic priority. And as an example, when I was doing a lot of work on the west side of Chicago, I was struck how quickly we could build private sector leadership support because gun violence on the west and south sides of Chicago were limiting the talent acquisition and retention for large corporations in Chicago. And for them, it was as much a business imperative as it was a public health imperative. But I think we need to continue to broaden how we think about those creative coalitions as we bring people together and do that coalition building. I also think that we all can agree that one of our challenges is to overcome being paralyzed by some of this contentious, divisive, and often politicized discussion so that we can really build consensus on what you all have called, and I agree with, on common sense gun policy. So while we're working on other contributing issues like improving behavioral health, dealing with poverty that plagues our inner city youth, and often contribute to these, we have to acknowledge that there are no silver bullet solutions, but gun policy is going to be an important aspect of this. And it's important for us all to stay aligned in hastening this discussion in a way that we can drive positive change. So with that, I want to hand this over to Michael Dowling, who, while I appreciate Allison including me in the leadership of the National Council of CEOs on gun violence, it was really Michael that was the impetus of this. And over the past couple of years, I've really come to deeply respect and appreciate his leadership in mobilizing and really challenging us to speak up as major community leaders and national leaders, as CEOs of health systems, to come together in our collective voices to create healthier communities and safer communities for everyone. So, Michael, thank you so much for your leadership. As always, I look forward to your comments and your insights as you've continued this work, and really driving us on this important topic collectively as we try to address these issues. So, thanks for participating today as well, and look forward to continuing the conversation here.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I really, really appreciate the opportunity to participate with you guys, and congratulations on holding this meeting, because the more meetings like this that are held, the better. We can never overdo these kinds of discussions. Just a little bit of background. I concur with everything that Michael's just said, but I went public on this about 7 or 8 years ago, when I got distressed by hearing about the statistics on the kid and adolescent and children's death. You know, it's a statistic the United States should be ashamed of. It's not something that we should be proud of at all. We're unique and distinctive because of the statistic about guns being the leading cause of death for children in the United States. So I went public basically because I believe that healthcare leaders, we have a special obligation. We have an inside job, which is running our organizations the best we possibly can. But I also think we have an outside role, which is, given our positions in our local communities and regionally and nationally, we have to take positions on these things that are controversial, even though we believe, and I believe, it shouldn't be that controversial to be fighting to save kids' lives. So we went public, and I created a Center for Gun Violence Prevention inside the health system. We've done an awful lot of work over the years in this regard. But one of the things that have been most inspiring for me is to get about 70 other CEOs from around the country right now that have joined us as part of the CEO Council. Now, we can do a lot of work individually in our local areas, and we can make a lot of noise individually, nationally, but when we come together as a collective, we can do extensively more. So when you get some of the top CEOs like Michael and others to be working with us nationally, it sends a very important message. And those 70 CEOs, they're from all states, red states, blue states, Democratic states, Republican states. It doesn't matter where they come from. They all now believe that this is an area that should be strongly promoted and be top of agenda. So we hold regular meetings with the CEO Council. We share information among ourselves all the time about what we're doing individually, so we can actually learn from each other. That's important. But most recently, we have developed a relation with the Ad Council. The Ad Council is a terrific organization that does these campaigns on issues of very, very important public issues. And they have joined with us at the Ad Council to do a multi-year campaign on gun violence prevention and safety. There'll be a little bit of a video, which I'll ask you to show in a few minutes. But this, I think, will elevate the discussion. I think it would broaden the groups of people that we want to get engaged with us, including gun owners, which, by the way, it's important. Most gun owners, and we work with them, are very, very supportive of gun violence prevention efforts. They believe in safety. I'm now talking about legitimate gun owners. And that's a category of people that we should be more and more working with, as well as other businesses. And it's very important now, again, because what's happening in Washington at the moment, all of the research efforts, all of the comments, all of the material relating to gun violence has been in Washington right now eliminated. We worked very closely with the previous White House and with the White House Task Force on Gun Violence Prevention and Safety. That department has been eliminated. The staff have been fired. Their efforts have been terminated. But that is no reason for the skepticism or negativity now. Just because there is a group of people in positions of responsibility that don't believe that's important doesn't mean that we don't believe it's important. So we've got to, strengthen and accelerate our efforts despite what's going on in Washington. I think we have to have the courage to do so. I know some people will get a little bit nervous, but I think nervousness is not a strategy. Being proactive is a strategy. And so we will be, working with the Ad Council now to continually engage, and we will be accelerating our efforts. Research, by the way, on gun violence and other issues is important, but I'll end after this, and then we'll show the video. But, research is being challenged all over the place right now. There is a lack of trust in science, and that is this idea that we shouldn't promote discovery and innovation, that science is not necessarily good. This is a terrible, terrible strategy to be pursuing. The end results of this long term will be disastrous for many, many, many reasons, which I don't want to go into here. But if there is an issue of utmost importance to our young people and to the government and to the country, why not research? Why curtail research on it? But that's where we are. That's the environment that we're in, unfortunately. But that does not mean that we cut back on the efforts that we are actually pursuing. So I strongly encourage everybody to be optimistic, to be positive, to move forward, because collectively we will make a difference. And I'll mention one last thing. I often mention this with people when they say that, there's little chance of success here. I remember when Ralph Nader, some of you on the call may not even remember Ralph Nader, but years and years ago, I remember when he started the campaign on seat belts and airbags in cars. Everybody said that this was ridiculous because car deaths was a big issue back then. And he said we should have airbags and seat belts, and everybody said that's ridiculous. That will never happen. Car makers will never make it. It'll be too expensive. Yet you look today, you cannot buy a car without these things being part of it today. So things do win. We do succeed over time. Patience is important as long as we don't give up the fight. And there is an awful lot that we can agree on. So we have to agree to agree. And that's why we did a video. The Ad Council did a video with us, and I think sends a message on the concept of agree to agree. So if it's okay, maybe you guys can show the video, and I would say to everybody, as I just mentioned a second ago, keep up the good work, stay positive, stay optimistic, inspire people around you, and whatever you do, don't quit. So let's show the video.
I do not have guns at home.
I feel really safe and secure having a gun in the house.
Judge, my opponent is completely disregarding almost half of my arguments which I respond to.
Communities must step up
Laws
and
alone
protest
cannot
against this
stop a
normalizing.
bullet.
Our community must educate and push back against all that violence.
Every individual needs to be aware of what they can do to keep kids safe.
I completely disagree.
I'm not gonna listen to points that are completely ridiculous.
Point of inquiry. Do you guys even realize that the #1 killer of children and teens are gun injuries? Why are we fighting about this?
We have a serious problem in this country.
There is no adult in this earth that wants children to die.
I worry for my kids.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Dowling and Mr. Dandorf, for your message of hope and encouragement, for your leadership. That was a very powerful video, and we can look forward to disseminating it further. So very much appreciate that inspirational work that you're doing. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Michael Siegel. He's a faculty member in the Department of Public Health and Community Medicine at Tufts University School of Medicine. His research has focused on the areas of alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, and tying his work together is the study of corporate influences on health and strategies to counteract them. Welcome, Dr. Siegel.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I want to start out by giving you actually a quiz. And this quiz is about how well you know politicians' positions on healthcare policy in the United States. And we're starting in 2010 with the Affordable Care Act. So I'm going to give you some quotes, and you need to try to identify who it was, what these are all Congress members, who said each of these quotes. So first, if we do not act, there will be counties in the United States where some of the most vulnerable Americans will have zero insurance. We have no portability today. You can't take your insurance policy with you across job and geographic change. When I change jobs, I don't lose my life insurance. Everybody in this body wants every American to have health insurance. We're going to continue to do everything in our power to protect people with pre-existing conditions so they are not afraid about changing jobs and being excluded from their new employer's insurance coverage. So was this A, President Obama, B, Senator Clinton, C, the Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, or was this D, Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi? So if we do not act, was actually Senator Lamar Alexander, a Republican from Tennessee. Everybody wants every American to have health insurance. That was Senator Ben Sasse, or another Republican from Nebraska. And we're going to continue to do everything we can to protect people with pre-existing conditions. That was Senator John Cornyn, a Republican from Texas. Now, a little more close to the issue of the day, here's the second quiz. So how well do you know organizations' positions on gun control? A hint, this is easier. All these quotes are from one organization. So people who are far more likely to misuse a gun than the average citizen should not be able to get a gun. This group also said citizens with a felony conviction should be prevented from acquiring a gun. This group also said losing some freedoms along the margins is a risk worth taking to protect the public from what they see as preventable violence. So was this the Brady campaign? Was this Moms Demand Action on gun violence? Was this Everytown to prevent gun violence? Or was this Giffords? The answer is, this was the National Rifle Association. And this is all within the past years. I'm not going back to prior to 1977 when the NRA was a different organization. In fact, the NRA has expressed two basic principles. The first is that, this is the former president, the question is how to narrow the criteria in a way that will both protect society and respect those whose rights would be affected by unfairly including them on a list that denies people their constitutional rights. We should find ways to help individuals who can be shown to be potentially dangerous based on their past activities or mental problems, and devise ways to limit their access to firearms without impinging on their due process rights or casting too wide a net. So another quote, the NRA supports efforts to prevent those who are a danger to themselves or others from getting access to firearms. Speaking about a mass shooting, this individual was nuts, and neither I nor the millions of people I represent as part of this organization that I'm here speaking for, none of us support people who are crazy, who are a danger to themselves, who are a danger to others, getting their hands on a firearm. So I want to suggest to you that the greatest myth in the entire firearm debate is that gun control is one of the most controversial issues that we face. In fact, this has been, for me, the least controversial issue that I've ever worked on. I've worked in tobacco control, I've worked in alcohol regulation, chemical industry regulation, and this is the least controversial issue I've faced in my career. Never have I had public opinion at the level of, 80 to 90% support for policies that I've been working for in those fields. Public support for universal background checks is at least 90%, and it's equally high among gun owners. In fact, the percentage of people who support background checks, the percentage of gun owners who support background checks is actually higher than the percentage of people who believe that the earth revolves around the sun. So this leads to a conceptual theory, which is the theory behind the project that I'm going to talk to you about today. The idea is that conflicts in social identity are what explain the observed political divide more than actual policy positions or meaningful differences in underlying beliefs and principles, so that the perceived political divide is really an identity divide. It's not a political divide, it's an identity divide, or it's not a policy divide. And that common ground is entirely possible if one looks beyond identity and explores fundamental principles. So we believe that the problem is that what has been almost completely missing from the gun policy debate is a discussion of fundamental ideas about the principles that should underlie gun policy. Even supporters of gun policies have not explicitly articulated a set of principles that their proposed policies are intended to fill. If anything, it's the opponents of gun policies who've communicated their underlying principles much more clearly. For example, that everyone has a constitutional right to own a firearm for self-defense. So this project, which we call Bridging the Divide, bringing gun owners and non-gun owners together to create an actionable roadmap to prevent gun violence, is a game changer. We think that this is really going to be a game changer in the field of gun violence prevention. Why do we think this? Well, years ago, I was involved in a similar battle, the tobacco wars, and the tobacco industry was able to successfully convince the public that this was a battle between smokers and non-smokers. Just as this article frames the issue, this was how it was framed nationally. And it wasn't a coincidence. The tobacco industry made a concerted effort to make sure that this was portrayed as a battle between smokers and non-smokers. And in fact, they created a fictitious organization called the National Smokers Alliance to make it sound like there was this huge national alliance of millions of smokers who were getting together to oppose any kind of legislation. In fact, this was a completely fictitious group. If you go to the registration for this nonprofit, the address is the same address as Philip Morris, which at the time was the largest cigarette company in the world. Well, surveys, just like surveys today, show that most gun owners support policies like universal background checks and red flag laws. The majority of smokers supported smoking bans, and that was really the beginning of the end for big tobacco. The key was treating smoking as not a battle between smokers and non-smokers, but between the public, smokers and non-smokers together against the tobacco industry. And so we feel that the same thing could be true in gun violence prevention, that we need to treat gun violence not as a battle between gun owners and non-gun owners, but between the public and the gun lobby. And it's really the gun lobby that has created this myth that this is a controversial issue. So the lessons that we learned from tobacco control, which I think we can translate into gun control, do not necessarily accept the premise that this is a politically sensitive or controversial topic. Framing the issue as politically sensitive is actually a concerted strategy of public health opponents. And if we accept that framing, we're basically doing what opponents want us to do. The key is to reject the assumption that there are two divided sides and to engage, quote, the other side. If we can do this, it's a game changer. Getting to smokers to testify forever changed the political dynamics of tobacco control. That was the end for big tobacco, when smokers started to come up in large numbers and testify against these proposals, and not just non-smokers. That really was the end. And as you know, non-smoking policies has spread throughout the country. Tobacco industry was brought under FDA regulation, and big tobacco today has very little power. So a core belief of this project is that bringing gun owners and non-owners together to identify common ground and craft a policy based on that common ground will be a game changer for gun violence prevention. And John Maynard Keynes said the difficulty lies not in the new ideas, but in escaping from the old ones. And what we're suggesting today is that we really need to break away from the old way of thinking about this as a controversial issue. Why do we believe this? Well, we did background research. This research was conducted jointly with 97%. It was funded by 97%. We conducted a nationally representative survey of 1,078 gun owners, aiming to identify areas of common ground and to understand attitudes about specific provisions of gun law. So we knew there was common ground, but where specifically was that common ground? We knew that there was gun owner support for policies, but what were the specific provisions of the laws that were necessary for them to support those policies? So first, the most deeply held principle among gun owners was that people who are at high risk for violence should not be able to possess or purchase a firearm. 80% of gun owners supported the idea that people convicted of a violent crime should not be able to possess a gun. 80% supported the idea that one of the primary goals of gun laws should be to keep guns out of the hands of people who are at high risk of violence while allowing law-abiding citizens to obtain guns. 80% of gun owners believe that one of the primary goals should be to develop criteria that keep guns out of the hands of people who are at high risk while not preventing access to law-abiding citizens. So a clear and robust finding of this survey was that gun owners overwhelmingly support the principle that people at high risk for violence should not be able to access firearms, while law-abiding citizens should not have unnecessary barriers to their access. So this is the common ground. And our hypothesis, our premise for this project is that that's all we need, that that's enough upon which to build an effective policy. The second important aspect of our research was we found that gun owners' opinions are very, very dependent on the detailed provisions of those laws. So if you just ask gun owners, do you support universal background checks? 90% will say yes. If you ask them if they support red flag laws, 80% will say yes. If you ask them if they support permits, 60% will say yes. But importantly, for 60% of the gun owners, their opinion depends on the detailed provisions for the law. And it can be as low as 20% or as high as more than 80%, right? So if you do not have a provision in the universal background check law that exempts immediate family members, if you are going to set up background checks so that it creates a firearm registry, you'll only get 20% of gun owners to support that policy. If you have exemptions for family members, if you allow private sales with background checks that are conducted by the private seller, now you can get up to 80% support. The same thing was true for red flag laws. If you propose a red flag law that does not have a time frame, a short time frame for a due process hearing to be held after a temporary protection order is given, and does not have a penalty for people who make false accusations, you're going to get about 18% support. But if you include those provisions, you can get up to about 88% support. And the same was true for all of these other policies. They're basically 20% of gun owners are never going to, are always going to support the policy. 20% are never going to support the policy. But this middle 60% is a huge swath of public opinion that can go one way or the other. And it depends on what the specifics are of those gun laws. So the basic premise here is that gun policy should ensure that people who are at high risk for violence cannot access guns while interfering minimally with the ability of law-abiding gun owners to purchase and possess guns. So that is the common ground that exists. What's missing? Gun owners need to be at the table, because if that 80%, if there can be a 60%, if there can be a 60% swing from one side to the other, we need to engage gun owners to know what are those specific provisions that need to be in the legislation. And there's no way to do that if gun owners are not at the table. So the conclusion of our formative research was that there is common ground, that this common ground is broad enough that we can build a policy that will be simple, effective in reducing gun violence, acceptable to a wide swath of gun owners, and most importantly, politically feasible, even in red states. The key takeaways from our research collaboration with 97% were that first, there's enough common ground to craft a universal policy. As Mr. Dowling said, if we just agree on what we agree, that is enough fertile ground to build a very effective set of gun policies. So there's no need to dwell on the controversial policies that alienate gun owners. There's actually a nexus between policies that gun owners support and policies that are the most effective. So it's very fortunate that it turns out this way, but our research clearly showed that the very policies that are most supported by gun owners are the policies that are the most effective in reducing firearm violence. And the policies that gun owners tend not to support, such as restrictions on assault weapons, restrictions on the type of weapons that can be purchased, are probably the least effective policies in terms of preventing gun violence. And this is why we believe that bringing gun owners into the gun violence prevention field would be a game changer. So here's the project. What it consists of is we are actually bringing gun owners and non-gun owners together, literally. We have 26 experts on this panel with a very wide representation of gun violence prevention groups. We've got representation from Everytown, Giffords, Brady, Center for American Progress, Legislators for Safer Communities, Vets for Gun Reform, States United Against Gun Violence. So a wide array of the national gun violence prevention community. But we also have wide representation of gun rights groups, including Open Source Defense, Recall TV, the National African American Gun Association, the Liberal Gun Club. We also have active duty military members, hunters, competitive shooters, gun dealers, and gun safety trainers. What are we doing? So we're getting together for monthly online dialogues. Each session is 2 hours, and it's professionally mediated by Essential Partners, which is a company that specializes in bringing people together on polarizing issues. We also have working groups, which are smaller groups from the larger panel that are hammering out specific proposals and trying to incorporate all the concerns of everyone on the panel. And this is going to culminate in a weekend-long conference that will be in person and is going to involve the completion, hopefully, of this policy platform, as well as the filming of a documentary, so that in case this project is successful, it will be documented and we'll be able to share it as an example of how do you bring people together and reach common ground on and reach a concrete policy on a polarizing issue. And then finally, there will be a dissemination phase to distribute the policy to policymakers, advocates, work with state advocacy coalitions, work with state legislative gun safety coalitions. So you might say, well, okay, another gun policy platform, so what? We've had gun policy platforms in the past. You know, everyone has a 12-point plan. Everyone has the 10-point plan. So here's the 5 things that are different. So first, this platform is being developed after extensive research conducted in collaboration with 97%. As I said, we did a focus review of the evidence regarding the effectiveness of gun laws. We did a national survey of gun owners. We also did focus groups and interviews with more than 100 people, including gun owners and non-gun owners. And it also included the leadership and members of major gun violence prevention and gun rights organizations. Second, the thing that I think truly makes this unique is that the platform is going to be developed by both gun owners and gun violence prevention groups and advocates. Not aware of any previous effort where a policy has actually been crafted by gun owners and non-gun owners. In other words, where gun owners were specifically involved in not just getting their opinions, but in actually sitting at the table to develop the details of the policy. Third, this platform is going to flow directly from the common ground that we discover. It's not going to come from anywhere else. We're starting with the common ground. We're using that as the fertile ground upon which to build the tree. Think of it as a root. The root is in this common ground, and then the tree will grow out of this, but it will be rooted in the common ground. Fourth, that the explicit goal will be to produce a package of policies that interferes minimally with the ability of law-abiding citizens to purchase, possess, and use guns. So it is a minimization and maximization problem. On the one hand, we were trying to maximize the effectiveness of the policy. On the other hand, we're trying to minimize the intrusion, the degree of intrusion on law-abiding gun owners. And so the question is, where on this curve do we want to be? We certainly don't want to be down here, because if we're down here, it means that we can be more effective. We can develop policies that are more effective without increasing interference with gun owners. So as we move up this way, we get more effective, but there's a trade-off in terms of getting more and more intrusive. So we don't know exactly where we're going to lie, but we're working in this area down here, and we'll see exactly where we end up. Finally, and this may be most important, is that this platform is going to attempt to identify wins for gun owners, believing that this is not a zero-sum game. We don't believe that there's any reason why either gun owners or conservative policymakers are going to have a reason to come to the table unless there's something in it for them. There has to be, it can't be a zero-sum game, or we can't reasonably expect that that we're going to get gun owners at the table, or that we're going to get conservative politicians at the table. And so by explicitly building in wins for gun owners, in other words, making it less intrusive in some ways, that's how we're going to get people to the table. And what our research showed us is that there are many areas of gun policy which could be made more effective and less intrusive at the same time. So some final thoughts. It's clear that there's sufficient common ground between gun owners and non-gun owners in both the guiding principles that underlie gun safety policy and in the detailed provisions of these policies, that we believe an effective gun safety policy package can be developed. And ultimately, we believe that the polarization that has been perceived as precluding a widely supported response to the problem of gun violence is largely a myth, if not completely a myth. This myth can be overcome only if we include gun owners in the process of fashioning an effective policy approach, shedding light on the truth of what the majority of gun owners support. The solidarity necessary to make this happen is going to require a willingness to compromise. But that willingness to compromise has to be on both sides. But the results will accomplish the dual aims of reducing gun violence while interfering minimally with the rights of gun owners. It can be a win-win game. Thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Oh, thank you so much, Michael. That was wonderful. Really great to hear about the project and the innovative approach you're taking. We do have a bunch of questions, so I'll get started right away. And the first relates to sort of one of your last points, which is what kinds of wins for gun owners are being discussed the most in this project, and how do non-gun owners generally feel about these wins?
So examples of wins for gun owners. Right now, in order to purchase a gun, every time a gun owner goes to a licensed dealer to purchase a gun, they have to undergo a background check. If there were a system where there were a database that recorded people who are prohibited, not prohibited, and that it was able to instantaneously let the dealer or private seller know, then you would be able to waive the point of purchase background checks and just have a one-time check that would allow gun owners to not have to get checked every single time they go into a store. So this would make it easier for gun owners, but at the same time, it would actually increase public safety, because anytime someone becomes prohibited by, for example, being convicted of a violent crime, it would be immediately reported to the state database. There are other examples of wins for gun owners. For example, with extreme risk protection orders, one of the things that we can do is offer free mental health referral. If we're really interfering and if we think someone is so suicidal that they're going to use their gun to take their life, shouldn't we also be offering them mental health support to deal with the suicidal, but the underlying problem? And obviously getting the gun out of the picture is important right away, but why not offer them mental health support? So there are a lot of ways in which we can develop wins for gun owners without sacrificing public safety.
There's a couple of questions about including the NRA in the project. Have you considered that? And if not, why not?
We're not including the NRA because they have no interest in supporting any gun violence prevention policy. So there's no place at the table for the NRA.
So I think this next question, any Michael on the panel could respond to. In light of the diminishing public trust of health care and research institutions, how do we reach out to skeptics and find avenues for collaborating on translating research into tangible policy?
Oh, well, let me just say that I've spoken in front of very, very conservative audiences. People that I would not assume would agree with me. When I talk about kids' safety, you get universal support. It is very, very hard for people, irrespective of their political ideology, who don't support the need to reduce deaths among kids that are preventable. And I spoke to a conservative audience in Manhattan there last fall, and I talked about this. And when I started, I assumed that I was not going to get a positive response. You get a standing ovation. So I think we got to continue to reach across the aisle here. There is more commonality, as was mentioned. Michael mentioned this. There's more commonality than we sometimes think there is. I don't disagree with his position on the NRA, but remember, the NRA is not as strong as it was. It has gone through a lot of turbulence in its own organization. Obviously, it will gain some traction today, given the current administration in Washington, which will support everything that they want. But there is a body of support other than them that I think we can be continually reaching out to. The other group that we deal with are local police departments, local police agencies, who are very, very supportive.
Thank you. Thank you. Couple of questions about how to address when you have seriously conflicting ideas in the project, and you appear to be stuck people in their positions. How are you managing that, and how do you get over what seem like impasses with the group?
So, you know, that has happened multiple times, and the way that we deal with it is that we give everyone, we hear everyone's voice, we hear everybody's concerns, and we basically negotiate. We try to work out ways to address everyone's concerns without weakening the effectiveness of the legislation. And we have these smaller working groups that get together and basically try to take everyone's opinions into consideration. Importantly, what we are trying to do is to build consensus. And consensus does not mean that everyone is going to like everything that's in the package. And I think this is, you know, for example, how the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act was able to pass. Not every consensus doesn't mean that everyone in the group is happy with everything that's in the proposal. What it means is that taken as a whole, people can live with it. There's some give and take, but people can live with the overall policy. And one of the ways in which we're achieving this is by having the panel look at an entire policy. So there may be trade-offs in one part of the policy that are, you know, there may be wins for gun owners in a different part of the policy. But all in all, when everyone looks at it, they can live with it. They're happy with it. They don't get everything they want, but that's the way that the most effective legislation can actually be developed.
Perfect. And what will be the guiding principle when disseminating the policy proposal of the project, especially given the current federal political climate? How would that impact the project strategy for outreach to state legislators?
Well, I think that the fact that the federal climate right now is not conducive to passing meaningful gun violence prevention legislation is actually makes the project more important, and it makes what the CEO Gun Prevention Council was doing much more important, because now all of the action really is going to take place at the state level, and so it doesn't really affect our work. If anything, I think it makes our work more important, and it makes state legislators more interested in what they can do, because everyone realizes that it's not going to happen at the federal level right now. And so, you know, this is what we learned in tobacco control. We could not get federal legislation passed. Congress did not pass substantive tobacco control legislation for about 50 years. And the way that we were successful is we worked at the state level, and just chopping away one state at a time, we were able to get to the point where enough states had taken action that the federal government could then step in. So I think that's kind of the approach here, is to really handle this at the state level. And that's why having the support of the healthcare CEOs is so important, because they represent all 50 states. They're a very powerful force in all 50 states. And so having their support can really help at the state level.
Let me just add here too, is that this is an opportunity for continuous public education. you know, where when you can't get legislation passed, that doesn't mean you you stop working. You educate people and you promote it as a major public health issue. So the public health angle, the health angle, most people get. And that over time will drastically influence what's happening. You know, that has progress. Some progress has been made. I mean, some of the statistics have improved. Now they look small, but you take improvement, any improvement, as a positive these days. And there are some strong advocates in Washington, like Chris Murphy and a lot of other people that I work with pretty closely. So it's an opportunity for public education, for getting the message out, for connecting public health and kids, adolescents' well-being. Yeah, you will gradually change the dynamic by the continuing education. That's why we decided to do the Ad Council proposal with the CEOs. And we stay away from the Second Amendment. I mean, I don't talk about the Second Amendment because that is you lose gun owners on that when you get into that issue. So we say we stay away from that, irrespective of our individual positions on it. We stay away from it, and we focus on the public health issues. So I think there's a great opportunity to educate the public now. We're in the midst of a lot of issues. And I think, by the way, I'll just add this, which is not just on the gun violence issue, but I think that there is a real opportunity now for all these CEOs to coalesce around issues around science, around vaccinations, other public policy issues that are unbelievably detrimental to the public health long term. And I think that we will have to look at what we take on other than just gun violence, because in many ways they're all interconnected. It's all a health agenda. And they're all interconnected, but we have more aspects and more pieces of it now as a result of recent actions out of the White House that I think will strengthen our case long term.
Yeah, I would only add to that Michael made in his early comments about sometimes you need to be patient, but you also need to be persistent. In keeping the agenda on the topic. So again, well, in Massachusetts, which is, where I am now, I keep the topic on the agenda, but more importantly, for our federal representatives, we talk constantly. It's always on my agenda. There may be other things on the agenda, but I always keep gun violence on the agenda as well. It's that persistence, right? How do we equip them with more details, not only what's happening within our state, but what I've been able to pick up from the coalition and the Council of CEOs is what's happening around the country to equip our legislature to bring those points up when they're talking at a federal level, right? And I just think it's just continued coalition building and just persistent coalition building around these key topics. I think we're going to have to do the same thing around science, right? It's just going to be persistence. It's not going to be rational conversations necessarily in the moment, but these things, wax and wane, and we got to look at the long run here. And I don't mean 50 years, but it may be 2 years or 4 years where this topic can be taken back up.
I recall at one of our gun violence forums in New York City, we had the mayor of one of the major places in Texas come and speak, and was unbelievably a strong advocate for gun control and gun prevention and safety in a red state in Texas. And he even said at that meeting that he sees a change in attitude among people in that state. And so, it's interesting that the council members, we may say one other thing, because of the change in the election in the White House last year, I assumed wrongly that we may have a drop off in a number of the CEOs wanting to participate in the council. We haven't had any drop off at all. It took a long time to create the council because people were a little bit worried, but there was no drop off. No. And now, given all of the stuff coming out of Washington that is so negative, that affects the world that we're in, I think you'll get more and more people, more and more determined that now's the time we got to do some more drastic advocacy, because there's too many bad things happening that affects public health, all including gun violence issues.
Yeah. Absolutely. A question for the CEOs and thinking about how you are thinking about this issue for for your systems. You're obviously embedded in communities. And how are you working with your clinicians, your providers, others in the system to promote mitigation of gun violence?
Well, we in our system, I mean, it's universally supported. I mean, I had no pushback at all from any aspects of my workforce. I got 90,000 people today, and I just finished a merger that will get me well over 100,000 people. I've had no negative reaction at all. I mean, a lot of unbelievable support. In fact, it's employees. I love, they even come to me and say, we like working for an organization that is willing to take on a national situation, a national issue like this. That because employees want to belong to a cause, not just only work for an organization. They want to work for an organization that has a broader agenda that is health related. And I think that inspires them. So we also, and I think Michael knows this, we got a grant from the NIH. We ask all patients that come to our emergency rooms, we ask them questions about their risk of gun violence, just like we ask them questions about diet and other things. And we have that study going on, and we're identifying quite a lot of people that need follow-up help because there's guns at home and they're in dangerous situations. So that's incorporated as part of our process in every emergency department across our organization right now. That's an inbuilt issue that is just there, and nobody's arguing against it, and nobody's saying this you shouldn't do. It's just an automatic now. And we've been doing this for a couple of years. Actually, we published something on this recently. And they're now asking me at least, what about vaccination issues? What about research? What about challenging, the fighting against the growing distrust of science? I mean, includes the gun violence issue, but what about all of the other issues? So I think that as a CEO, you gain more support internally by your actions externally.
I'd add to, I agree with everything that Michael just said. Weaving this into all of our screening, behavioral health screening, are there guns in the home screening, and sort of embedded in our intake, including trying to get it into all of our primary care practices, so that we're sort of identifying that proactively, right, in terms of the things that we can be educating people about. The other thing is, that on the community side, education in schools, embracing our relationships with high schools and elementary schools. We're trying to increase interest in science and STEM programs and those sorts of things. These are opportunities for us to weave that into the conversation, importantly. And we're seeing success, right? Because it's meaningful to parents of students in those schools, because they're just as concerned about these sorts of things. And I also think it's the underscoring the comments that have been made already around not trying to threaten gun owners, but trying to leverage them in the conversation, even within the communities that we serve. And we do have a few communities that we serve that have challenges with regards to violence, not necessarily gun violence, but violence overall and behavioral health issues. And so we have to address all of those facets of what leads to the risks associated with gun violence, and try to deal with those risks, not just head on the use of guns.
Yeah.
And just Michael, in the high school, I don't know if you know, but we're opening up our own high school in the fall, Northwell High School of Health Sciences, focusing on, it's with the City of New York. And the curriculum will be on nursing, radiation medicine, mental health, and physical therapy. And that's part of our effort to get more and more high school kids interested in careers in healthcare. And we're working like you do. We're working on about 80 high schools right now, but we'll have our own high school in September. because I think it's an extension of what it is we need to be doing.
Wonderful. Excellent. We're at time. I'll just, there's one comment here about a copy of the 97% study and citation information, whether that's available for dissemination, and I think it likely is, and we can perhaps send this out to all the meeting participants. So thank you all very much. This was really wonderful, terrific to hear from all of you. Really, really important work that you're all doing, and thank you for your leadership. We will take a 10-minute.
Thank you.
We will take a 10-minute break and return at 3:10.